Hello, my name is Jim Griever. I'm an interviewer for the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. I'm interviewing Mr. Richard Miller today on December 13th, 2007 at the main library. Our camera operator today is Dennis Daly. Also present today is Mary Jo Miller, Richard's wife of 62 and a half years, married in 1945. Richard, to start the interview, I'd suggest that you might mention where you were at the beginning of the war and how you were inclined to become enlisted in the United States Army as a bombardier.
Well, I could start right off. Everybody remembers, that was alive then, remembers where they were at Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor Day.
Sure.
Well, I was at Olivet College. I was majoring in art, particularly in sculpture. But I was on the stage as the shoemaker in Thomas Decker's play, The Shoemaker's Holiday, which was a 16th century play, or 17th century, a rather bawdy play of the shoemaker and his apprentices and their various honeys. At any rate, right in the middle of the thing, the word came into the rehearsal, which of course set quite a panic through the whole place. And but there was no mad rush to enlist, I'll have to tell you. There was a mad rush to not enlist. By and large, there was one guy that we had that did. In fact, he claimed he was in the reserve. Turned out he was a real nut. But nobody knew it till then. He really wigged out. But at any rate, the following, I was too young then to be drafted because the draft roll then was for 1 year and you had to be 25 when the war started. But the various armed forces of Army and the Navy and the Marines, the War Department was, and the Navy Department was separate. In those days, there was no Secretary of Defense. But they were in competition for the best and the brightest. I never thought of myself as the best or the brightest, but we were college students. So they were all trying to get us, and they made all these pitches to get us in the officers' training programs. But the Air Force had the sweetest deal because they said you could finish college and then go in training for a year before you could ever get into combat or anything. And without 3 years, there's a good chance the war will be over. In any case, it's 3 years longer. So a friend of mine and myself, we ran up to Charlotte, Michigan to enlist. That was the closest one, was the next county. And I told you this story already. We got in there, and we were just as happy as birds. Oh God, we were just singing Air Force songs and stuff. And we get in there, and there's the flight surgeon and a couple of medics there to examine us. And as they were about to weigh me, I looked on the scales and they had a chart there, and it had for the minimum as well as the maximum weights for various heights. And for my height, the minimum weight was 150 pounds. Well, I didn't weigh 140 pounds. So I thought, well, that's the end of my Air Force career, until I heard the sergeant call out to the flight surgeon, 150 pounds. Now, I should have been suspicious right then that the Air Force was not exactly a straight organization. But we didn't, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, or what I thought was a gift horse in the mouth. So I went ahead and we got enlisted. Went back to college, and I got a picture of myself in there someplace, carving away that winter on a damn crucifix for the college chapel. During the spring vacation, it was on a quarter plane, this is in late March, I went to New York. Mary Joan was my girlfriend then, and I went to New York, I'd never been there, to visit her family. When I got the telegram from the Air Force, told me I was to report for active duty in 2 days. I couldn't go back to Olivet College in Michigan and get my stuff. I had to go down to Columbus, where I came from. There was a train from New York to Columbus. And my dad drove me to the railroad station and put me on the train for Chicago, and I made it just, along with hundreds of thousands of others who were in a similar position. And we took a train down to Biloxi, Mississippi. I don't know how many were on that train, but they really had us packed in this damn train. We were all in civilian clothes, but we're technically in the Army. Got down to Biloxi for basic training. Well, I didn't know anything about military life. Well, Biloxi's down in the Gulf, and I should have learned then, realized then, but this is why basic training is effective. It makes you think the whole world is nuts, because everything you do is nuts. We were learning close order drill in oyster shells, where your feet would sink in about 6 inches into the shells, and this guy's counting cadence like you could keep in step. Well, there's no way you could keep in step. You know, you're trundling over everybody. We did the manual of arms, and they had these damned old Enfield rifles from before World War I. I'm sure they hadn't been fired in that time 40 years. And it's amazing we didn't knock each other out swinging those damned old rifles around. And that was for 6 weeks we did this stuff. Well, by this time, you'd kill your own grandmother. Everything is so nuts. Then they wanted this Air Force with all the wisdom in the world. The military, the reductio ad absurdum of bureaucracy. The only thing that matters is what's on paper. So they wanted to get all this bunch of college students to the same intellectual level, was the reasoning behind it. So they had what they called college training departments, which of course meant a way for the colleges to get a bunch of guys back in it because they'd all been pulled up. Mine was Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. We get there, and you start out, well, we took physics and chemistry, not chemistry, physics and math and history. Maybe that was about it, because there was a lot of military training involved. I do remember I learned to love the bugle call retreat, because that meant the day was over. And you could find, because they just had you going on the run all day long. But to show you the strangeness of this whole affair, the math, we started out, now these are all guys taken out of college. The first week we're doing arithmetic, the multiplication tables, adding 4 to 5 and things like that. But they proceeded on. And within a few weeks, we're dealing with spherical geometry, covering it in a couple of days. Well, you know, if you don't know that stuff, you're not going to learn it in that period. Yeah, it was unbelievable. The physics was the same way. But I did remember there was a physics prof, I don't remember his name, at Drake University, who was explaining an erg to us as a unit of.
Yes.
And he said, it's a mosquito power. That's about the only thing I learned there in 6 weeks. I got the flu. Well, to the Army, you were either sick or well. There was no in between. If you went on sick call, to be considered sick, you had to have a fever of 100, 101, 100, something, I don't remember. And if you got that, they put you in the hospital. Well, I didn't have a fever. I felt terrible. So they put me in a damn hospital. There was no hospital for the test me were in, so they sent me out to Fort Des Moines, which was an Army base a little bit north of Des Moines. Which one I discovered there was once you get in, you can't get out. You know, I flew for the last couple of days now. I'm ready to go home. They said, oh no. For one thing, they need your work because the way the Army hospitals worked. Now again, this was brilliant, and the hospitals ought to do that today, and they cut medical costs down considerably. But what they did was, you see, everybody just wore hospital gowns, and those Army hospitals, but they were not in, from ward to ward, you went out of the ward, you were outside, usually with a roof over the top, but you'd be outside. You'd step out, and so it would be a string of rooms all connected on the outside. And you were wearing these hospital gowns. Well,
One of the next steps in your Air Force career must have been
then,
being identified
then I
as
went to Santa Ana. There's a picture
Santa Ana.
there someplace of marching there, where the main thing you'd learn to do was make, what was it, 12-man front squadron left turns. You spent
Santa Ana, California.
Santa Ana, California. That was a classification center for cadets to decide whether you're going to be a bombardier, navigator, or pilot.
Okay.
And I was there for, I don't know, a week or two, a little longer than that. And they also give you all kinds of psychological testing. They sent you in to see a psychiatrist. I remember one of the things they made you do, you went in barefoot. I don't know what that was supposed to indicate. They gave you dexterity tests like with your fingers, so they'd have a whole pile like with little kids, you know, a whole bunch of pegs
Sure.
you put in holes and something like that. Well, I'm left-handed, so it never occurred to me they'd make a bombardier out of me, because the bombardiers are mainly right hand. But I guess I was dexterous enough. Dexterous is a word which means right-handed. And by dexterous means you have two right hands. Well, you're in the library business, you probably knew that. But so anyway, I got classified as a bombardier, which didn't bother me any because I never had any particular longing to be a pilot. You know, didn't like to drive that much, still don't. So then they sent us off to gunnery school. That was just a regular Air Force gunnery school in Keeneland, Arizona, for not only potential bombardiers and navigators, who also had to become gunners, but the regular gunners on the airplanes. So that was a big school out in the middle of the desert. I do remember when we got off after a long train line, the Air Force, the Army always paid for Pullman, but we never got Pullman. The railroad was made a mint out of it. It was always old coaches, I think, that was used in the Civil War. A lot of them didn't even have Johns in them. They just had a hole in the floor at either end.
My word.
So you'd arrive at a damn place, and the troop trains had no priority whatsoever. So you were on the siding most of the time. It took you forever to get any place. Well, we got to Keeneland, and one, we were dirty and mad and, you know, just tired. And I don't remember that lieutenant's name, the TAC officer, but we're standing there on the platform outside of the road station milling around. His first order was mill around and act confused. And then he said, okay, order, line up alphabetically according to height. I mean, now we're really in a state of shock. I mean, what the hell are you supposed to do? We'd been under all this discipline all this time.
That's not easy to do.
It wasn't easy to do. Well, we finally caught on to this guy just didn't really care. But, you know, at first you really think he's serious. But then you learn how to shoot. And the guns we used mainly were 30 caliber machine guns, but they had 50, but the 30 caliber used smaller ammunition, so it didn't cost as much for them to use. Then it was a lot of fun because they had things set up. Must have cost $1 billion. They had turrets set up. Oh, they had a shooting skeet. I'd never shot skeet in my life. I'd never had a shotgun in my hands before. But, you know, mark and pull, you know, you sit there and shoot these damn clay pigeons. I was not much good at it, but I could hit about half of them by the time we're done. There were guys that were dead shots with them. We had a couple of guys that had been, one of them had been a salesman of rifles and stuff in Idaho, hunting country. And boy, was he a dead shot. He could even hit things
Sure.
with an Army 45 pistol, which nobody else could do. But but then they graduated after a week or two of that to shooting. They'd set up 30 caliber machine guns in a turret like the nose turret. I guess turret up here in the front of the bomber. These nose turrets would rotate. You had controls where you could rotate them, and the guns would go up and down over them and so on. And you would shoot you would shoot skeet. They had put shotguns instead of machine guns in the turret, and we shot to run so we could learn how to lead a target in the turret. That was a lot of fun. But we're all crazy young kids, and the planes that we used were mainly B-17s, big kind of big bombers. There'd be a whole bunch of students who get on one plane, and those pilots, of course, they weren't much older than we were. And it's amazing anybody ever lived through all this stuff. We would fly in the B-17s. We're right near the Grand Canyon. This was spectacular. Those pilots, they'd like to go down in the canyon and just for sightseeing. We'd go down below the rim, on a B-17. This is dangerous as hell. With all those strange currents and stuff, and the B-17s are better than a B-24. Far more stable. That wing that they call that special wing, that Davis wing, was they used to call it a flying prostitute, no visible means of support. Those wings would flop up and down a couple of feet as you're flying along. B-17 had a much wider wing. We were just plain nuts. But then finally, we got through that. That was, I think, 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that. They sent us to Bombardier School. My case was Deming, New Mexico, down the Mexican border. That was kind of nutty too. And what people don't realize how dangerous that training was. Our pilots were all young, flying these damn planes, and they were all wild.
Sure.
We lost 3 planes in my squadron in Bombardier School. Pilots had lost control one way or another. In 2 of the planes, everybody was killed. About half a dozen, about 4 cadets, plus the pilot, the co-pilot. In the other plane, a couple of cadets survived. They were so terribly burned. I remember we went to visit them in one Army hospital, but just wrapped from one end to the other. And it was always spooky, go into a classroom, and the guys that cleaned up the classrooms would put the chairs on top of your desks. And one of the first things, you march into the room, because all this thing is done, you're doing double time every place, you get into a place, and then you would go off to your desk, and then you get an order to put the chair down and sit down, and we'd all sit down, and there would be these chairs still up there. It was spooky. And the one thing I did learn there, and that was navigation. I learned the principle of life from this guy. The guy didn't know any navigation at all. He was a bombardier, and he couldn't get from here across Vine Street. But these were standard tests given. And so when it came time for the examination on this navigation, it was both dead reckoning. All this was a compact course of what the navigators got, both dead reckoning and pilotage. But at the end of the course was taking this standard examination, giving it a look at that. He says, I know I didn't teach you people anything because I didn't know anything. So he said, here is the answers. And he wrote them on the board. And he says, now you're on your cadet honor to miss the amount to make your point average. Wasn't that beautiful? So that's what we did. But in the midst of that course, as he taught, you had to talk for an hour, so he'd talk about something or other. But he did teach me a principle in life, which is that the most common navigational error is a reciprocal one. And I was going 180 degrees off, going the wrong direction exactly. And that's true in everything in life. People always think their problems are little, and they're going the wrong way. And they like to think the problem's little. But I learned that from this crazy nut.
It stuck with you.
And that's stuck with me. Then, so anyway, I got through bombardier school. Then we had to go, we were graduated. Oh, thought we were hot shit, you know. And they sent us to Hammer Field outside of Fresno, I think was the name of it.
Hammer Field.
Where we were supposed to meet a crew, be assigned to a crew. Well, we were assigned to a crew, but while we were waiting to be assigned, we were all just out of school. We'd only been officers for a month or less than that, a few weeks. But they wanted to keep, they've always wanted to put this great thing about Army discipline and all this crap. So they sent us out on bivouac as a bunch of bombardier, not cadets anymore, lieutenants, about 20, 30 of us, out there in the desert there outside of Fresno. There was a lieutenant, first lieutenant that we were all second lieutenants. The first lieutenant was in charge. And we're going up this damn ravine in the desert. There's not even any water in the creek, it's a dry stream.
Yes.
Then they were going to test us with chemical warfare. All through all the time that you're in training, and I was in training for a year roughly, you always had to carry a gas mask with you. The first thing they take away from you when you go overseas is your gas mask. Because they know nobody's going to use it, gas masks. Poison gas isn't any good in warfare, and they know it, and they know it today. It's good for killing civilians in a town, but that's about all. Any slightest one, it's no good at all. So anyway, they threw all this damn poison gas down in canisters of poison gas down into this thing. We were supposed to put on our gas masks to experience this great thing. So, survivor, learn how to survive in war. Well, we'd already had a surfeit of training in chemical warfare, so we ran up the hillsides of the canyon. So leaving the gas is always heavier than the air, leaving the gas down below, and the lieutenant's up on the top storming. Because nobody put on a gas mask, we just ran. And what's he going to do, court-martial us? You know what I mean? They need somebody to go out there and fight. So when people are slated to go to war, you can't punish them. People forget that. What are you going to do? Well, we finally got assigned a crew. And this was I didn't realize at the time how absolutely lucky I was.
Now, this was an assignment into a crew that you were intended to go into combat with.
That's right. There was a crew of B-24's normal crew was 10. 4 officers and 6 enlisted men.
Thank you.
But our pilot was a guy called Major Calvin Ward Fite, F-I-T-E, from a Southern military family in Germantown, Tennessee. His grandpappy had been a colonel in the Confederacy. And he himself had been a Randolph Field pilot, I'd say a pre-war pilot, which was the West Point of the Air. There was no Air Force Academy of that. And he was going to be a career officer. So that's why he was a major already. He was in charge of a navigation school. And I've been raised in a family that was not exactly warlike, and Southern officer class were considered to us the evil elements of the world. But you see, I learned in the Army, I learned in many ways, you get thrown in with people that have totally different background than you are, that you don't realize how parochial you had been. I learned that first because usually I was in barracks with, alphabetically, so I was with all those goddamned Irishmen. Being a Miller, I got the O's on one side and the Macs on the other. And I'm sitting with all these guys that I thought were a bunch of benighted bigots, and I learned to love them. I mean, these people, hell, they had as good as education as I did, and all this stuff. I just didn't know. I'd never met people like this. Well, in this case, I met this Army colonel, not Colonel Major, who came from the Southern tradition, military tradition, who was the gentlest guy I ever met in my life. Extremely competent pilot, extremely bright, but extremely gentle. He had no race prejudice or anything like that. He did expect to be obeyed, but he would be fair about that. He wouldn't expect you to do anything that was unreasonable. And furthermore, I liked to talk with him. We talked a lot. Now, it was at this time, as again it shows the great brilliance of the Army Air Force training of those days. Our navigator, Jim Wheeler, one night, starlit night, because we're out in the desert, you know, you can see, my God, you can see stars all over the place. He called Jim Wheeler out, and he says, Jim, he says, you know, I took the navigation course when I became the commandant of the navigation school in Oklahoma or Arkansas. But he said, it's been a while since I've done that, celestial navigation. So would you come out and show me where the constellations, some of those constellations have moved? Now, Jim Wheeler was just out of navigation school for however long it was. I think it was longer than Bombardier School. He couldn't find the North Star. Now, this does not give you a great deal of feeling of confidence. Of course, what we didn't know at that point was we never needed celestial navigation. That was all a waste of time. We never flew that way. We avoided it like poison. Well, then we had a mission. This was totally bizarre. We were going to go, the whole crew, we were going to go to Phoenix, Arizona, which is, what, a few hundred miles from LA.
Yes.
It was supposed to be a dead reckoning test for the navigator, so he had been isolated with curtains around his navigation table. So Jim Wheeler was sitting there, you know, looking at his instruments and all this and the other. I forgot the name of those computers we had, but computers then were more like slide rules that you could solve wind vector problems and stuff. The Navy would be doing the same thing. Well, we flew along. And finally said, when the ETA, the estimated time of arrival, ran out, and Jim hadn't said a word yet, I called on to him and says, well, can you furnish us with an ETA? And he says, I don't know where we are. He says, shall I start square search? Now, square search is where you would go and you'd fly a mile leg, turn 90 degrees, and then just ever increasing things looking for Phoenix, Arizona. Well, if you'd look out the window, you could see Phoenix from LA at the height we were. Of course, he couldn't, but he got totally lost over 300 miles going dead reckoning. Now, in the meantime, he was a handsome guy, and we drank a lot. But we finally got, and the pilot stayed with him. He got to like us. In fact, he got new orders. He'd put in originally for B-29s, because that was the thing to get into if you wanted to have a career after the war in the Air Force. That was the hot plane then, was the B-29. Well, he finally got his orders, and he had told him to cancel on me because he liked us so much, including this crazy navigator. So we get up to our port of embarkation. You can see why I've considered this whole thing as strange.
Were you
experience
supposed
in
to
life.
fly your plane over there in the
Yes.
squadron?
Yeah. I don't know if you know this or not. We lost 2% of our planes flying over the Atlantic.
Wow.
Obviously, they lost more going over the Pacific because they were greater distances and smaller landfalls. But yeah, when people get excited about all the airplane accidents or stuff, they're nuts. We lived with those things all the time, with risks that are 10,000 times more than what these people are afraid of. And then, you just get used to it. So at any rate, in fact, when we were at March Field, where we did a more extensive training, and that was at Riverside, California, and we did a lot of crew training then. We lost a plane a week there. That's 10 men dead every week. To show you why I began, when I said it was, I didn't realize how lucky I was to have this major fight as a pilot. We got up for one night flight once, and we got out to, and he was running through the pre-flight on this B-24 we're supposed to fly. These are all war-weary B-24s. And he called the line chief, the captain, and said, I'm not going to take this plane up. It's no good. And the line chief came over. He was on the ground. B-24, if you look at that picture, where the hell is it?
Oh, here.
The pilot's sitting way up here looking out of one of those little windows down in a guy down in here someplace. But he says, yes, you are. You're going to take that thing because it's superior officers. Well, Fight stuck his head out one of that little window. They pulled it back, the side windows pulled it back so the guy could see his major's leaf on his collar. And so he said, I'll get you another plane. So he got us another plane, we took off. But within 10 minutes, that plane was given to another crew and they were all dead. They got to the runway and never got off the ground.
That's frightening.
Well, it happened all the time. Yeah, it was bizarre that anybody survived. The training, the training command was more dangerous than combat was.
So he saved your life first time.
Yeah. But that really did. So we got to Hamilton Field in San Francisco as a port of embarkation. Now these orders will always be secret. Where you're going. They give the pilot a sealed order, which he could only open every day what he's supposed to do. Well, what they did tell us to do, they told the officers, said send home all your summer uniforms, buy some more winter uniforms. So we assumed we're going to England. So we sat around and waited. By the way, we're going into San Francisco every night and getting drunk. I got pictures around someplace, but I don't have them. I couldn't find them. At the top of the Mark Hotel with our crew getting drunk. We did this you get stir crazy. We'd go through barracks in the daytime and just smash light bulbs. We were officers, It was nuts. Well, turned out after we waited about a week that the WASP, as the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, they flew the planes from, they made them up there near Ford. Ford made a pile of them, what was it, at Willow Run. Made the bulk of these B-20. So I had to fly it across the country to San Francisco. Well, this chick had run into a mountain, I guess, along the way. So we sat around another week getting drunk every night. Oh, then they decided that we all you had to qualify with a .45 pistol before you go overseas. You had to be competent. So my navigator, Jim Wheeler, and I said, we can't even go because neither one of us could hit that damn bookcase from here with a .45. Well, isn't this great? So they get us out to the goddamn pistol range, give us these .45s. There's a sergeant there that's on the line, they say ready on the right, ready on the left, and all that crap, They give you a clip or two, and these targets are 6 feet squared, 15 yards. The first time I fired, I couldn't believe it. There wasn't a hole in the target. And it's 6 feet square. I couldn't believe it. And I was doing everything they said, hold your breath and squeeze and all this crap, and there wouldn't be a hole in the target. So I wasn't even trying, I wasn't cheating. I just couldn't hit the damn thing. And Jim was just as bad. So we think we're home free. But just like with the guy with the scales, he said, oh man, that's great shooting.
You pass.
You pass. Now, why did they even bother wasting ammunition? So, at any rate, so then they said, all right, send home your winter uniforms, buy suntans, buy summer uniforms. The enlisted men, of course, they get theirs free, so they don't, but just, the 4 officers, we had to go out and buy new ones. So we went out and bought a new suntan and crap, and they issued us bug powder and escape kits with fishing. Oh God, these escape kits were bizarre damn things. They had machetes in them, and they were about like a backpack. So we assumed we're going to the Pacific. Well, this time the plane arrived. We're in Hamilton Field now. We're in this plane. We're at the end of the runway, ready to take off into the Pacific. Go to war, rip on the Nippon and all that stuff. Well, the tower was called down to fight, and it says, get off the plane. It's been, a general here wants to go to Honolulu. So we got off the plane. The general got on the plane, flew to Honolulu. So we went through another week or so. And then they said, all right, keep your summer uniforms, but get some winter uniforms, and keep your bug powder and all this stuff. Well, they say they don't tell you where you're going, but we figured, well, we're probably going into the Mediterranean. Well, so then we got off, and we flew this damn B-24 across the country, and our port of embarkation then was Manchester, New Hampshire. And I'll never forget, we were only there a few days, and we'd actually got orders to take off. So we flew to Newfoundland. This is somewhat of a distorted Great Circle route to Italy. We didn't even know it was Italy because you could only, the pilot, who was the only guy who got the orders, they were all sealed, and he could open them one day at a time. When we got to Newfoundland, then we were stuck there. And we started getting stir crazy. The Red Cross had given us these damn going away presents, which included a pack of cigarettes and I don't know what else, but also one mystery. And ours were all Philip Marlowe mysteries. Not Philip Marlowe, who was the guy that detective, maybe it was Philip Marlowe. Well, at any rate, the guy that was a kind of a nasty personality kind of detective. When we all sat around there reading all these times, and I'll never forget, Major Flight, whose education had been strictly military, was not into literature that much. But he started reading these things, and he would be reading this, and he said, they can't do that. That son of a bitch, talking about this detective. They had we were all heavy smokers, of course, but the only spokes of tobacco we had were Spuds, which were 10-cent cigarettes in those days. Well, the military, but that's all I had. Well, finally we got to take off after about, it must have been 2 weeks there. We was living in Newfoundland. Boy, it was a desolate place. And you couldn't get off the base. You were never let off the base. We were never a permanent party. Our great prayer was to be permanent party someplace where you get treated like a human being instead of as a transient. We finally got the orders, but it's to go at night to the Azores. We started out in the dark. And we took off in the dark, and then the tower told the pilot to turn off his lights. And Flight was dumb enough to listen to him. And he turned off his lights. Well, you know, what happened was he was night blind. He couldn't see.
We're picking up from our last interview, which involved the story from First Lieutenant Miller involving flying in formation with B-24 Liberators on one of their bombing runs, their missions that left Italy. And Richard, why don't you take it from there?
Well, now let me think. We'll get this all straight. We were going to fly a mission. The first mission that I flew on, I was flying with a pickup crew, and our regular pilot wasn't there. There was another pilot, and I was just flying as a gunner. And the pilot pointed out as the bombs were dropped that said, "That's flak," and there were a couple of bursts of flak on the horizon, 30 miles away, because it was the Zbab railroad bridge where the Danube turned south to go to Budapest. And the flak was over Budapest, 20, 30 miles away. And I thought, what's all this nonsense about being afraid of flak? However, on my second mission, I discovered why. We were going to go to Salonika. Now, it's on this map here. But Salonika is here. We flew from about here across Greece, and then there was this bay, or whatever you call it here. We flew across that bay. They sent us in at 12,000 feet, which was about half the altitude we usually flew, because there was supposedly going to be no flak, no fighters. And that was a great altitude for our bomb sights to be accurate. And so we flew the mission. I was flying deputy, which meant the lead plane was right over our nose. We were down here, and he's up here, and I could see up and see his bomb bays. And when his bombs dropped, I could toggle, but I also was running to the bomb site in case something happened to it. Well, we went down the bomb run. We dropped the bombs, and no more than the bombs dropped, then all hell broke loose. That lead plane blew up, went right over the top of us, just flaming parts. You know, that's pretty much of a shock.
I'll say.
But there was no place I could go. I'm down there in the bombardier's compartment. You know, I'm just stuck there. One of our waist gunners jumped out. He just got floated down over the fatherland. So what had turned out had happened was that the Germans' Navy, a cruiser, had pulled into the harbor that night. And they have very accurate anti-aircraft. But you see, the problem was they didn't shoot till after our bombs were already released, because as you approach the target, in this case, the target was the railroad station in Salonika, Greece. This is just a regular public railroad station. The notion being that the Germans were retreating from Greece back into Yugoslavia, go back to Germany, and we were supposed to get the German soldiers that would be in that station. Well, the bombs follow right, they're going forward as fast as the plane, so that, well, we dropped the planes a mile too short of the target, dropped the bombs, and then we just go back home. Well, the bombs go on there, and we just laid a beautiful pattern of bombs over that damn railroad station. Well, and while this plane of bombs just went over the top of us. We were all scared to death. We get back to the base, and we're still shaking. But then we didn't think anything about it. 2 weeks later, that whole crew came back that had been in that plane that blew up. Unbelievable.
No mention of them coming back.
They just showed up there, madder than the dickens.
Surprise.
What a surprise. They had taken with them a German army newspaper, which was very similar to our army had a newspaper, to just give us news. And it was, generally speaking, pretty honest news, as was the German newspaper, to the German soldiers. But the headline was, Amerikanische Terrorflieger. And it showed the main street of Salonika, the Wehrmacht, bayonets on their rifles, holding off the Greek citizens on either side to keep them from lynching. This pathetic looking 10 guys marching down the main street of Salonika. Now what they did was, they then turned, the Germans turned these 10 guys over to the Ustashi. Now the Ustashi, there were two groups of partisans in Yugoslavia. The Ustashi were the partisans that liked the Germans. And as Tito's partisans, are the more famous ones, were the commies who liked the Allies and so forth. So but money was involved here because the United States government would pay to get crews back with blue seal currency. That's the money which was actually backed by silver, as opposed to being the yellow seal. It was backed by nothing. It was like monopoly money. So they could buy, because the value on the black market of a blue seal currency was at least 10 times what it was, you know.
Really?
Oh yeah, it was like gold.
Never heard of that one.
So that the Ustashi usually sold these 10 guys to Tito's partisans, who then, because the Ustashi didn't have any contact with the United States, so they sold them to Tito's partisans, who then sold them again to the United States. And these guys were back in the base 2 weeks after they were shot down. They were mad because if they had been gone for a month, they would not have had to finish their missions. But since they got back in 2 weeks, they had to finish their so they were madder than the thing, and they had this German newspaper to prove what had happened to themselves.
So 30 days lost, or as POWs, qualified them to return to the U.S.
That's right.
But anything less than
that, and they had to finish their missions. And so they were called terror flaggers.
What a disappointed group of guys.
What they were. But then immediately we all knew that that's exactly what we were. We had laid a pattern of bombs over that railroad station. All it did was kill Greeks. All the Greeks, people that were going to church, would go into the church on Sunday. It was on a Sunday noon. And they were going to church, and we laid a pattern of bombs on them, blew them into the next world. That's why they were hot. And to them, we were terror flaggers. And that stuck with us through the whole war. We knew what we were doing. But strangely enough, your brain, you think, well, that's all right. That's what you do in war. Because we were told this is a total war. The whole German population is the enemy. Men, women, children, the whole thing. This was the propaganda. I'd heard it for a couple of years before the war. So, you know, it didn't really bother us much. But when you see that, where there's crew that had blown up these people, then you know that this really is not right. This is not what an ethical person should do. But we went ahead and did it anyway. And we finished our missions, and we did all this crazy stuff like that. There was one mission, we were taking off. I said, by this time I was flying with my pilot, who was now the squadron commander. And he was the leading the group, and I was the lead bombardier for him then. I don't know what had happened with the regular squadron bombardier, was sick or something. So I'm flying with him.
That was fight.
That was fight. He was a marvelous guy. He came from an old Southern Confederate family in Memphis, Tennessee. And had gone to Randolph Field, which was called the West Point of the Air, before the Air Force Academy. He was a pre-war pilot. So, but he'd become a commander of a navigation school, but he wanted to get combat time in for his future career. He wanted to be a permanent Army officer. So he became our squadron commander, and we were flying this one mission, and we got up over the head of the Adriatic and started getting over the Alps, and they said, well, there's cloud cover over Vienna. You won't be able to go. We were only allowed to bomb if you could see the target. If it was cloud covered, you either had to go to an alternate target or go back home. Well, since it was early on, the rest of the whole damn Air Force went back home. just cancel the mission. Major fights. They don't know their ass about weather. That's going to be clear over Vienna. So you said, do you mind if we just go ahead? He did ask us. This is a curious thing. He's a plane commander, but he did ask the crew because he's going to risk our necks. Should we go on? And we all said like a bunch of idiots. Why, sure, let's do it.
How many planes in the flight?
25. 25 bold idiots taken off on their own to attack Vienna with 300 guns. And we come up over the hills of Vienna, what do they call it, the Vienna Woods.
Yeah.
We look over, it was as clear as a bell. Major fight. He'd been in the navigation school, but they studied all that damned meteorology. So he was a great meteorologist. So we look over the target, but there was one problem. As we got closer, the bombing run would be 40 miles from the initial point to the target. The Germans, when they saw us coming, had lit smoke bombs all around that thing between the Danube River and the Danube Canal in Vienna. I don't have a map here of Vienna, but there's that area that was all industrial in there. And they had smoke bombs just to throw a cloud of smoke over the target so you couldn't see the target itself. Well, they'd sent me to this crazy bombardier school down in Bari, Italy. That was 15th Air Force headquarters to train supposed lead bombardiers, and they get into fantasy type stuff. And one of them, what they called offset bombing. You pick a spot on the in front of where the smoke is, set up your bomb sight on that. You know how many degrees it is between where that spot is and where the target is just by measure. Now, just let me tell you, this by measure here, you could miss a mile and not even think about it. You could miss 2 miles and not think about it at the altitude we were. But I was like, well, we'll do that. So I'm focusing on some darn thing that's just short of the Danube Canal. I offset the optics up that, what I'd calculated to be the right amount. As we're flying this mission, gone down there, the pilot says, do you mind if I fly evasive action? Well, when I'm looking at the bomb sight, I only have a 2-degree vision. I'm looking right straight at the target, and I can't see anything else. So as far as I knew, nothing was happening. I picked my head up, looked out through the window, and Jesus, it was flak all over us. It was just, well, my heart just fell in my throat. So I said, by all means. So he starts doing all this stuff, see, which ordinarily we never did. Well, that meant that the wing planes can't stay close by. You can't have a close bomb pattern. They're all going to toggle on me. But they don't want to get hit, so they're pulling out there another several hundred yards. So the squadron now, we'd laid a bomb pattern, must have been 5 miles long. Over all this, they sent a recon plane up afterwards. We claimed we did this. We had no proof. We had no camera on the plane that we did it. But my pilot being a major, he didn't want to say, gee, we did this and didn't even get credit for it. So he got a reconnaissance plane to go up there that night to photograph that area to see what we hit. Well, I had laid a pattern of bombs over the French workers' quarters. I had missed the actual plant. But we all felt quite good about it because we figured, well, they can rebuild those factories in a hurry, which they could. You could bomb a factory and it'd be in production again the next week. But if you got the workers, they couldn't replace them that fast. You know, that would really tie them up. And these were French workers, which meant they didn't love the Germans. But the Germans were very successful with this because they gave everybody somebody else to hate that they'd put over them. The low men on the totem pole were Russian prisoners of war. They didn't have anybody under them. So that, for instance, when we dropped delayed action bombs on marshalling yards, railroad yards, to keep the Germans from sending trains through there, with the notion that the bomb might go off anywhere from 2 minutes to 2 days, to keep them out of the marshalling yard for 2 days. Never slowed them a bit. They sent a bunch of Russian prisoners and says, dig them up. And the lucky ones got the 2-day ones. And the unlucky ones got the 2-minute ones. All the plans that the Pentagon made were so silly that you just can't believe it. So the whole thing is insane to us. But we did it. And then I finished my missions. I say, we landed back there in Roosevelt, Dave Roosevelt died. And then they didn't make me a lead bombardier. They were going to, but the other officers rejected the regular pilots and stuff because I was not a very military-looking guy. I couldn't keep in step. When we had review parades, they'd keep me in the barracks as an orderly so I wouldn't disrupt the formation because I couldn't keep in step. I was crooked. I couldn't stand straight. My military attitude was not very military. So they said, that's just too much to promote you. So they made another guy the squadron bombardier, but he got shot down. So then we were going to go back, they were going to be reassigned to fighting in the Pacific. So the Major Fight asked me if I would volunteer for another 35 missions in the Pacific. And I was dumb enough to say, yeah, I'll do that.
But you did receive the Distinguished Flying Cross.
Yes, I did. But that was for a mission, I don't remember what it was for. You got your medals by rank. And all officers that were that flew a mission got a Distinguished Flying Cross. And the guy that wrote up the citations was just some guy someplace else who was just assigned to write up a citation for these people. And he would write all the great heroism involved. And then you'd get out there and they'd print a down medal on you and you didn't even know what it was for. On the other hand, those poor enlisted men, they really had to do something outrageous to get one, because an officer would then have to put them in for that, and then they would have to decide, well, does this really merit that? And that was awful hard to do. I did it once with a radio operator. His name was Pike. I got a picture of him there someplace. The bomb had hung up in the shackles, a 100-pound bomb. And it's bombardier's responsibility to go back and get that bomb off the shackle. That was my job. Now I'm scared of heights. So I was not going to open the bomb bay doors, because then I'd be looking down 20,000 feet and you're standing on a beam that's 6 inches wide, and the wind howling there, the wind would be going, bouncing around through those bomb bays around 150, 200 miles an hour. I just didn't want that, so I left the bomb bay doors closed. Couldn't see it. So I tried to lift, but I wasn't strong enough to lean out over the bomb bays and pick that bomb up and lift it off the shackle. So I called to the radio operator. I said, Pike, would you help me? And this idiot said, yeah, I'll help you. So there we are. We're both standing out there on this damn little beam like this. I was towards the rear of the plane. He was towards the nose of the plane. So he's holding the nose of the bomb. I've got the tail. Between the two of us, we could lift it up, take the weight off the shackle, so we could lift it off the shackle and drop it. Well, we let the bomb just drop. Well, I knew it would just take off the bomb bay doors.
You wanted it to go through the bomb bay?
Yes.
Door.
Well, Jesus, we didn't want it to hit there because it blows up. It's got a fuse in it.
Sure.
So now it just takes the bomb bay doors right off. And I looked down. Now I am looking down, as was Pike, as we're looking down over the Alps. I mean, this is frightening. It's cold. It was a winter time. It'd be 20, 30 degrees below zero up there. The wind's blowing all over the place. And my first reaction was to go up towards the flight deck but I was towards the tail of the plane. I weighed about 140 pounds. Picus was a big guy. He must have weighed 180, 200 pounds. His initial reaction was to go to the tail. So we slammed into each other, and he just literally carried me to the tail of the airplane.
With the doors?
With the doors open, yeah. And we're going on this, walking on this little damn beam. I was never so scared in my life. I put him in for a DFC, because he did that voluntarily. He did not have to do it. I did, that was my job, but it wasn't his. But he never got it. So I say, you really have to do something wild if you're an enlisted man. With a Purple Heart, all you have to do is report to the medics while you're in combat. You get a Purple Heart. So a navigator I knew, Mary Joan never remember him, Jordy, he got a piece of flak in his bottom. Just a little thing like a BB, penetrated through his flight suit and stuff, going through the plane, hit him in the bottom. When he landed, he went to the flight surgeon and to get treated, so he got a Purple Heart. For getting shot in the ass. So you get a Purple Heart where you get killed or where there's just some insignificant thing. And it cracks me up nowadays when people are complaining 50 years later they didn't get their Purple Heart. Well, the Army's filled with snafus like that. And I don't begrudge them their Purple Hearts. We loved it because the Army, when the war was over, the Air Force was very generous with medals. I ended up with, I ended up with a Distinguished Flying Cross, 7 air medals, wait a minute, 5, they come in clusters. For every 5 missions, you got to go silver cluster or something. A whole pile of, amounted to 7 medals for air medals, because you got it automatically for just flying the missions. Then you got 5 points for every battle you were in. We got battle stars for everything, every battle was going on when the 15th Air Force was bombing around there, so I got battle stars for countries I never saw. I got a battle star for invasion of southern France, I never saw France. I got one for Ploesti, I never saw Romania. The group did, but I wasn't on any of those missions. So I ended up with all these points. 5 points for every medal and all that stuff. So I had all those points, so that when the group was waiting to go to Japan, when the war ceased, if you remember after the second atom bomb, the Japanese very quickly quit. I was already in the separation center on VJ Day. I was out, and to indicate to the general public that you were actually not in the Army anymore, so the MPs wouldn't pick you up and throw you in the slammer for being AWOL. They gave you a little thing you could put on your collar, or you had to put on your collar if you didn't want to get arrested, because you had no orders, you're really out of the Army. And we call it the ruptured duck. It was supposedly an eagle, but it just was an eagle that really looked like it had stomach cramps. And when I left, that was at Shepherd Field in Chicago, was my separation center. When I got there, they said, all right, now you want to be in the Army Reserve, so here you go. And I said, no, I don't want any part of your cotton picking Army. I want out. I want all the way out, no reserve. And they said, we don't have any papers. We never had any. Everybody gets in the reserve. I said, not me. I want out. He said, well, you'll have to wait. We have to get the papers from Washington. I said, I'll wait. I waited several days there in my barracks there in this damn place, waiting for them to get orders to make me a total civilian. But I waited. I got this little ruptured duck thing, and then I was going to go back to college, finish college on the GI Bill. So that was in September, September 3rd or 4th, whenever it was, when I was separated.
45.
I got on a train, went to Olivet, Michigan, which the college I was going to, and as I was on the old New York Central from Chicago going to Detroit, there was this little old lady sitting next to me, and she didn't understand the mysteries of all these badges and stuff, your rank and all that stuff. She just knew I was dressed in uniform. And she looked at it and she says, it must be terrible to just be drafted when the war's over. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I tell you this, I'm out. I did my time. And then got even that stranger because I didn't think anything about it. I had never registered for the draft. I don't know whether they said that in the first thing or not. I never registered for the draft. You see, they came out with this deal that if you went in the Air Force in 42, you could finish college and then you get called up. Well, of course, they called us up much earlier than that. But so I never registered for the draft. Shortly after that, the Defense Department decided this was ridiculous because all the services were offering similar things. They were in competition with each other. Yeah. So they said, we'll just draft you, and then these services put in their requests, and then you just get assigned into the Marines or the Navy or the Army or the Air Force. So I went back in the civilian life, finished college, started teaching at Oberlin College. And what year was it? That was 49. My God. The FBI came to get me to arrest me for being a draft dodger. And I said, what are you talking about? And I had to pull out they quickly saw what the problem was. But really, they'd come in there thinking I'd been a draft dodger all these years. So I had to pull out my discharge papers and all of this stuff because I was not in the reserve. On the other hand, you see, if I'd been in the reserve, I would have gone right back off to Korea. And I laughed as all those guys went back. I didn't feel sorry a bit for them.
Please explain the distinction between the United States Army and the Army of the United States.
The United States Army is a regular army. So that ordinarily, anytime you're a graduate of West Point, or you're a member of the United States Army. But when the war comes, and you have draft everybody there, and they need all kinds of generals and lieutenants and captains and sergeants and all kinds of things. Those are all temporary rank given. And it's called the Army of the United States. And for instance, General Eisenhower was a lieutenant colonel in the regular army when the war started. He became a 5-star general. Now, until he became a 5-star general, the minute the war was over, when he was just a 4-star general, he would have gone back to being a lieutenant colonel when the war was over. However, when they made that 5-star rank, and they only made 5-star rank because, there was rank inflation as with everything else, and all these places, so Great Britain, all our allies had 5-star generals. We didn't, we just had 4-star ones, so they invented it, the 5 stars, and there were just General Marshall, General Eisenhower, Admiral Nimitz. Those were all made 5-star people.
Leahy, I think, was also.
But it was made permanent for them. So when the war was over, that remained there. So he was still General Eisenhower when he ran for president.
So he reverted back to the U.S. Army.
No, he did not, because he was in the Army. The Congress had passed it. Although when they made that 5-star rank, they made it a permanent rank.
Okay.
That was unique. All the 4-star generals went back to being whatever they'd been when the war started and would continue their career, like my pilot, who had been a major when the war started.
So they moved out of the Army of the United States back
into the United States Army, and they would resume their prior rank. And then they could go on. Of course, by and large, we managed to stay in wars most of the time. I don't know, how many wars have we been in since World War II? My God, it's a pile of them. You know, Korea, well, I mean, go through all that. But so we drove that Army of the United States kind of a thing. It had gone on in the Civil War. They didn't call it that then. They didn't call it the Army. I think it was just called brevet ranks. You know, you were a brevet colonel. General Custer, for instance, was a brevet general.
Brevet?
Brevet, yes. He wasn't a regular Army general in the Civil War. And when the war was over, when he wanted to go out and kill Indians, he reverted to his prior rank, which was colonel. But they changed their terminology, I guess. I don't know why. We were always reminded of it. Regular Army people could always rub it in on you. For instance, every Army blanket had stenciled on the bottom USA, United States Army. That was in a dye that could not be gotten out. Could not bleach that dye out. And so every time you made your bed, they were rubbing it into the fact you were not in the United States Army. And Army blankets overseas were worth a lot of money to the civilians on the black market. So you could see those Italians, they would make suits for you for that matter, but they'd make suits, you could sell them for a pretty damn good price. But when you see you see some guy walking down the street, but you could still see that USA showing up wherever it would on his suit. Or on it, maybe gave it to his wife to make herself a dress, because it's very good wool. But USA was really indelible. It was nuts. The Merchant Marine, they used to, you know, they supplied us with all our stuff. We got those darn Liberty ships coming over, and when they came over, the Merchant Marine, they would sell everything on the ship. They would sell all the sheets and blankets, food, everything. They'd go back to the United States in an empty ship, practically speaking, because they'd made so much money selling all the stuff off the ship to the civilians illegally. And I know a couple of guys are in the Merchant Marine, and when the GI Bill was written, they complained about that and said, gee, we were just as vital. I said, yeah, but you were making all that money. If you were in the U.S. Navy, you're making $50 a month or some darn thing. You weren't making $3,000 a month. They want to have it both ways. But no, it was the whole shebang was pretty strange. But I went along with it. I don't deny that. And but you do have to remember, though, that we're no better than anybody else. And
did you feel patriotic?
Oh, I felt patriotic. Oh, did I feel not well? That's the funniest thing. You do. There's a feeling, for instance, you could be on some mission to drop napalm on Munich or something like that. You know, all you're doing is burning up civilians. That was the whole purpose of it. And the napalm, I didn't know anything about napalm. Napalm was jellied gasoline. And you'd have a 500-pound bomb which had a fuse in it, which had set the fuse to blow up about 500 feet above the ground. So then you have all these little splatters of jellied gasoline on fire. And when it hit anybody, you couldn't rub it off. It would burn right through you. It was terrible. There was a bombardier I lived with for a while, another bombardier, and he'd been a Baptist minister in civilian life before he got involved in the Air Force. And he refused to fly on missions carrying napalm. He said, that's unchristian. And I would argue, and I said, what the hell? So you blow them up or burn them up, what the hell's the difference? But that's where he drew the line. But the Air Force, like our squadron commander and stuff,
so
if you refuse,
that.
yes, if you refuse combat, that's automatic treason. They can shoot you. But they never did, because they knew we'd fly another mission. You know, where all he did was drop explosives. I'll never forget. And then he got killed himself.
So those were unofficial waivers.
Yeah.
guys that stood up and said,
Yeah, they would, the Army does things in strange ways. Any bureaucracy does. The Army, to my notion, is reductio ad absurdum of bureaucracy. But they do everything backwards, but they still get stuff done. But it's done in such strange fashion that it's unbelievable. I'll give you an example of that was venereal disease, and they call it now sexually transmitted disease. Our squadron led the 15th Air Force in VD at one point in the winter of 45. Now this is an embarrassment to the commander and all everybody. So how do they resolve this problem? Now what had happened was some crazy Italian chick, the perimeter of our squadron area had no fence around it or anything. There was just there was a battalion of, or not even a battalion, I think it was a company of black MPs who patrolled our perimeter. That was the border. So these chicks would set up their little shacks, bring a tent right outside our border. And pretty soon there'd be a path going to them from all the guys in the squadron. Well, these chicks were not known to be pure. They tended to get involved with any disease there was. So all of a sudden, we got all this damn venereal disease. So they said, what will we do? So they got us all together during our 3 hours after supper. We met out there on the damn green hill. This was the first round of it. We were leading the Air Force in VD. First, I don't remember what his first battle says. The first day the chaplain would get up. We didn't even have a chaplain. We had a traveling chaplain that went around. There was one chaplain for the whole damn group. So, he had 4 groups that he was a chaplain to, so he only got around once in a while. He would show up and give you a lecture of how you should keep yourself clean for God. The squadron commander would get up on the next day and give a 3-hour lecture on how you have to keep yourself clean so you can fight the enemy. And what was the third? There was a round of 3. Well, after about several weeks of this, we had the lowest VD rate in the Air Force, mainly because nobody had any spare time. All our spare time was used up getting all this. But we quickly reverted back to the same situation. So
number one in the Air Force. Regained your stature and your...
So this time they used another device. Now the group each squadron had their own meteorologist. So they decided we should all become experts in meteorology. So we got a 3-hour lecture every night for about a month with the 4 rotating meteorologists. Now they loved it because, the meteorologists love to spout their stuff, as you can tell on weather channels. And they had a captive audience, and our VD rate went right down again. Now, isn't that brilliant thinking on the part of, see how the Army solved that problem, you see? Totally through the back door. That's the way we did everything. So it's easy to become a little cynical when you've been through all that. And so you see me today, I can just show you like on this map, you see where we were way down here. I don't know if you can see this thing or not. Way down here in southern Italy. Mm-hmm. We had about an 800 or 900 mile radius that we could fly as a maximum, which would take us about like that. Mm-hmm. Well, originally all the way down into Greece. Mm-hmm. And through Yugoslavia and Romania and all that. Well, as the Germans kept getting pushed back by the Russians and so forth, those borders always changed.
Plesty was written up as one of the most heavily defended targets because of Plesty.
Well, I'll tell you, it was pretty heavy, but not that much. It was pretty heavy. I'll tell you, the most heavily defended, to my notion, was a place, what the hell was it called? It was up in Czechoslovakia. It was a synthetic oil refinery. The name will come to me sooner or later. It was up, I just saw the name of the town that was near.
Italy?
No, this is in Czechoslovakia.
Czechoslovakia.
I was up near Brno, north of Bratislava and Vienna just a bit. It was a tremendous synthetic oil refinery that it had more guns surrounding that one target. It was about a mile and a half square oil refinery, converting coal into oil. And it had over 300 guns defending its border. We went there, we bombed it once a week. And we bombed it so much that my bombardier class had a small class reunion in its prison camp. So many guys that had graduated from my bombardier class were shot down over this one synthetic oil refinery. They all could get together and talk about school days. I saw some of them later on after the war, and it was rather strange. They said when the first ones that got shot down, the Germans would capture them, put them in a prison camp. Well, the German prisoners, the German guards didn't want to get bombed, so they just opened the prison camp, just let everybody out, and said you can just run back into the hills of Czechoslovakia, which they did. Now there's no place to go, there's no food or anything, so they know the prisoners aren't going to come right back again. So they did. They all spread through the thing. Well, of course, also there were 300 guns shooting at these guys who were doing the bombing. So they missed. And the main thing they hit were the outskirts outside the factory. And so they still were in danger of getting hit by bombs because we missed so badly. So from that, he said after those first few missions, from that time on, they went into the refinery where they were safest because we never hit the refinery. This is 750 planes going up there once a week and never laid a damn bomb in the place. We got a lot of guys killed over it. I got scared a lot, I'll tell you. I flew about 4 or 5 times over it myself.
Did you have fighter support on any of your missions?
Oh yeah, well we had to have fighter support. Yeah, that was
P-47s or 51s?
Well, we had P-38s and P-51s. And the 15th Air Force was a strange divide. It was in Italy. It was Churchill called Italy the soft underbelly of the Axis. Well, it may have been a soft underbelly, but boy, were they mean. But then Italy had been divided in command. The western half of Italy was left to the Americans to command, and the eastern side was left to the British. We were on the British-controlled side. The British live off the land. In other words, they take food from the local people to feed their troops. The Americans always brought their stuff in. Well, we brought our stuff in, but since the area, generally speaking, was under British, the Italian people hated us like poison because we were starving them to death. And so you don't dare to go into town without sidearms. You know, it was spooky. Yeah, I'll tell you, there's no worse feeling than being in an occupying army because those people hate you with a passion. And those Italian women, if you ever saw Zorba the Greek with those women wearing those long black, these women who wore these long black gowns and they had this darn veil over their face. Well, they'd be walking down the street, and when you got in within about 3 feet of one of those women, they would cover their face with that veil. It was spooky, I'll clue you. The only guy in our squadron that could go into town safely was our flight surgeon. And that's because he had been an obstetrician gynecologist in civilian life and he liked to keep in practice. So he went into town and practiced gynecology,
Made
well,
house
mainly
calls.
obstetrics.
Made house calls.
Yeah, so, well, you know, keeps them, and of course the Italians loved him, but, you know, these women, because they're always getting knocked up, there's nothing else to do. And so his name was Doc Peck. He was a marvelous guy, but he could go into town and, you know, be greeted, but not the rest of us. It was really a bizarre scene that, so you're living there, you know, down there where everybody hates you, and we were really living we did hire, for instance, ourselves, like in our officers' mess, we always hired Italian cooks because they could take those sea rations that we got and make them edible. I forget what they all were, but there was an awful lot of, what are those little sausages, Vienna sausage, and dehydrated potatoes and dehydrated eggs. They came in great big cans. And they could make that, you know, you have to be a good cook to make that stuff taste good. But they were so used to making garbage taste good that they really made pretty edible meals for us.
Did you receive any periods of leave? At all?
Yes. We got what they call R&R, Rest and Recreation. They gave us 7 days. What I got myself was at one point was 7 days on the Isle of Capri. I never got to Rome, I never got to Cairo, and I never got to Jerusalem. There were rest camps in all of those. But every time I got orders cut to go there, they would get canceled. So I never made it to any of those except Capri. And what they did was they just load up war-weary planes.
Got canceled because of an operational mission or something?
Yeah, or whatever. They would come down from above that they needed crews that day or some damn thing.
Did you have to earn leave with a certain number of missions, or was it?
Well, pretty much. What depended. Various groups worked in different ways. Our group, we did it by the number of missions. The same thing with the liquor allowance. The Air Force, in its infinite wisdom, not for the enlisted men, but for the officers, allotted a bottle of booze a month for every officer. It would come in one big shipment. It'd be all kinds of things, from the finest bourbons or scotch to real rot gut. The lowest on the thing was used cooperage. And depending on the squadron commanders, they would distribute in different ways. Our squadron, they did it by the number of missions. So the guys that had the most missions would get to pick first. And the latest guy on the thing would get last. Actually, speaking, none of us really cared that much because we just liked to get drunk. And in fact, I can tell you a funny story about that. There was one night, my navigator and myself, Jim Wheeler, decided that this was too much to go to the officers' club and just sit there and drink our damn fifth of booze. That we would do a more decent thing. So we each got our bottle of booze. I don't know what kind of booze we got, but it probably wasn't that bad because we'd been there a while. Anyway, we went back to our tent. We took a bomb crate to use for a table, and he sat his ball on one end of the table, and I sat mine on the other. And we both popped shots until we passed out. About 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and the sergeant stuck his head in the window, in the door, and said, "Get up, you're a duty officer." And I said, what in the Lord's name are you talking about? I had a terrible hangover. I felt terrible. You know, you drunk a whole fifth of booze, you feel pretty bad just a few hours later. And he says, you're a duty officer. I said, no, I'm not the duty officer. I would never have done this last night. I checked the roster ahead of time. Duty officer, his job was to go around and wake the crews that were going to war that day, which is the thing you don't like to do because they throw stuff at you. So they really do. You go into their tent, and you say it's time to get up and go to war, and they start throwing everything at you. So he said, yes, you're on there now. And I had to get up and be the duty officer. Now I went to major fight after that, and I said, why in the Lord's name did you do this to me? He said, you know that Jim and I, we'd both drunk this thing of whiskey in our tents. We'd gone to sleep, and then you do this to me. He says, Dick, you don't know what you two did last night. You got up from your slumber, went over to the officers' club, and there was a major from another squadron there. There were 4 squadrons in the group. One major from another squadron, operations officer or something. And he had this bottle of whiskey, and you went up and took it from him and said, you got my whiskey. And I took his whiskey from him. And when he tried to fight back, I punched him. Now, I didn't know it or not, but of all the outrageous things they'll get you for, punching a superior officer is about as serious a charge as they can lay on you. It really is. They can stick you in jail forever for that. He says, I saved your neck. I called that major over, and I explained to him, I says, now you know, I said, I got this, I'll make him duty officer this morning, and that should satisfy your need for honor. You know what, well, he knew what that was. So he granted Major Fight's request that instead of being court-martialed for pitting superior officer, I'd be made duty officer. Oh God.
That was a lucky break.
It really was. Because they really take that very seriously. And I know that, you know, it's not that I didn't know. You know, in those days, in the enlisted men, the officers didn't do this, but the enlisted men, before you got paid, they read the so-called punitive articles of war to you. And that's all these things that they could, you know, defining desertion and AWOL and all these things where they can throw you in a slammer. And plus, they check up on your sexual activity, so-called Peter parades. Did you ever hear of Peter parade?
I haven't heard that term, no.
No, well, before you got paid, everybody wanted their pay, and they paid you in cash, you know.
Yes.
They would, the whole outfit, all enlisted men would line up as a kid, we did as cadets, would line up, and as they pull it out, milk her down, and you pull out your pecker and you strip it down, and then this guy would go along to see if there was any discharge. And if there was, they figure you had the clamp or whatever, and you were put in the slammer, because in those days, there was, at the start of the war, there was no cure for venereal disease. So their solution was you just went in the stockade and you stayed there till you were cured, which is a life sentence, because they had no cure. But in our case, they already had penicillin and stuff, so it wasn't quite that bad. But it was nuts. But the officers did not have to go through that indignity. That's one of the great things about becoming an officer. And I quickly learned that there's only 2 ranks in the Army to be, was either a private, because they can't do anything to you, or a second lieutenant, because they can't do anything to you. Because they can't, you know, without throwing you out of the Army. So, any promotion you get, you expose yourself to being able to be demoted. And I was never that concerned about rank in the first place. So there was no problem with me. But I didn't, well, you got to be first lieutenant just automatically for being there.
In the remaining few minutes that we have, Dick, what was your impression about the mood of the country when you got home and during the war?
Well, when I got
The
home,
general populace.
of course, when I was in war myself, I mean, when I was off in Italy, I didn't know what was going on at home, you know, except for what. But when I got home, when we landed, we came back on the U.S. on that old pleasure line, the America. But we landed there, Newport News in Rhode Island, and you're treated like you're just treated like terribly. The returning soldiers were treated just like people for people to get rich on. They overcharged everything.
Wow.
You couldn't get a meal in a restaurant without being overcharged.
Wow.
You couldn't rent an apartment or anything without getting overcharged. They just stuck it to you. The worst thing you want to do was the first thing you want to do is get out of uniform so they couldn't see that uniform. And that's the way it was, you see, all the way up until I got into South Dakota, where we were waiting to go to Japan when the war was over. That the minute that I couldn't get in civilian clothes, as I told you before, until I got off that train. I had to wear that ruptured duck. But boy, you would go and get, and my mother, I called her, I was, give me my clothes. And she says, no, she says, I understand everybody gets too fat when they're in the Army and they're too big. I gave them all to the Salvation Army. So she didn't save them for me, she threw them away, and I hadn't gained an ounce. But it didn't do me any good, so I had to go out and pay for new sets of clothes, which I did immediately to get away from that prejudice there was against the military.
Mm.
We were not welcomed home.
Is that just in Rhode Island when you got home? Or
That was Newport News. That was Virginia.
Right.
It was across the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, wherever I went. I say all the way up to South Dakota. When I was in Shepherd Field, when I was there, they were still treating you like a dog. And furthermore, that was a separation center. And there they were trying to force everybody, all the officers, to, well, the enlistment too, to get into the Army Reserve. You know, there's a big deal, and for a couple of weeks, you know, you go off to camp or something, you get all this money, you can get all this hospitalization and everything. And it was, in a sense, a good deal if you like that stuff, but I was disenchanted with the military life. I'd lived it, I'd fulfilled everything I was supposed to do, but I was not a happy camper.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating recollection of your wartime duties and responsibilities, and I'm sure that your family and friends will all enjoy seeing this in the course of time. And again, I want to thank you very much for doing this, not only for the Library of Congress, but for your family and yourself.
Yeah, well, of course, most of them heard all this stuff already. I'm a talker.
A great one.
They're more than willing to shut me up.